I am the not pictured disembodied voice on the screen. I'm Virginia Ferris. I work with the Special Collections Research Center, and I'm here with Todd.
Hello, I am Todd Kosmarek. I'm the University Archivist and the Interim Associate Head of Special Collections. And so the reason today you're not seeing Virginia or I on your screen is because we're going to do like a little historic campus tour, and we're going to walk through, virtually, not literally, walk through some old maps of the NC State University campus that I have brought to share with you today, because I think they're really interesting, and you can see a little bit about how the campus developed during its early years. And the maps that I brought out today are from about the beginning of campus until about 1940, or the World War II time period. And if this goes well, we will have a second Twitch stream, maybe in a couple months, where we look at some maps from later in the university's development, from the post-World War II time period, because there's some interesting ones there too.
Yeah, a little behind the scenes kind of tip for everyone watching. This is a really interesting kind of test of displaying really large things and strangely shaped things on Twitch. So it's going to be really cool to see these maps that Todd's pulled out, but you'll also get to see us unrolling and moving around and zooming in. So it'll be a cool kind of experiment.
Yeah, you'll hear a lot of paper wrestling, but I think you'll see some cool things. So I have zoomed in the camera on this one map that we're going to start off with, and I'm just going to briefly zoom out so you can kind of get a sense of the size of the map. But because of that glare over in the corner, I want to zoom in. So the reason for that glare is that this map is encapsulated in Mylar, which is a plastic type thing, and so that's why it's creating this reflective surface. But we have it in Mylar to protect it. But not all the maps we're going to see today are in Mylar, so hopefully we won't have that glare problem. So this map, the bird's eye view of A&M College, is the earliest map-like thing that we have in our collection, showing the early development of NC State University. And you may wonder, why is it called A&M College? Well, the original name for NC State University was the North Carolina College of Agriculture and Mechanic Arts. So that's where the A&M came, and that was how we went by until we became State College in 1917, when the name changed there. So I'm going to point out some things on this map, which means we're going to have to zoom in on it. And I want to start off with some things that may be recognizable. There's 3 buildings on this map. That still exist today. This is Holiday Hall. It was the original building built on campus in 1889. This map, by the way, dates from 1897, so it's not quite the very beginning of campus, but it's within the first 10 years. So this is Holiday Hall, still exists today. It's where the chancellor and the provost have their offices. This building here is Watauga Hall, and it still exists today. It was originally built as a dormitory, and it still exists as a dormitory today. And then over in this corner, if you just bear with me as I position things. Okay, that building there is Primrose Hall, which still exists today. And it was originally built in the 1890s as to house the agriculture program. So it has these greenhouses coming out the side of it at that time. Those greenhouses are long gone, but the building is still there. And it may even have a weather vane on top. I can't remember. You may not be able to see this very well, but in the very corner, that's Hillsborough Street. And this little thing here on Hillsborough Street that looks like something on railroad tracks, well, that's a trolley car, because the trolley used to come from downtown Raleigh out to this part of Raleigh, which was out in the country in those days. But part of the reason it came out this far was because across Hillsborough Street, the State Fairgrounds was located there at this time, and not where it is today, farther down Hillsborough Street. Okay. There's a few other things I wanted to show you on this map. Sorry, I'm still getting used to the camera. This building right here is called the Dairy, and I've seen it also referred to in some other documents as the milking parlor. So this whole area here is probably about where the court in North Carolina is today, where the east side of that is, and maybe Tompkins Hall would have been in that area. So you can see that it's kind of fenced off. So that's apparently where the cows were kept. And they'd milk them in the milking parlor, the dairy. Why that was important to do at this time period, because in the very earliest days of the university, the students had to raise their own food. So they were out there working in the fields, handling the livestock, because if they didn't, they weren't going to have anything to eat. And at this time period too, there's not that many students going to school here, maybe 100 or 200. So we were a small enough university where you could kind of put the students to work, and they could support themselves
and a lot of
growing
them
their food.
were here to learn about agriculture and
Exactly.
husbandry, and so that was practical, hands-on education for them too, I guess.
Exactly. I mean, we were the A&M College, the Agriculture and Mechanical Arts School, so they were definitely learning, techniques and practices and the science behind agriculture, and then taking that back home and putting that to use on their farms.
It's sort of what we call experiential learning.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, we're going to go farther down the map. So there's the barn there that the livestock would have been kept in, and it's hard to tell from this map, but that's probably about where either part of Leisure Hall is today or where Poe Hall is today. These buildings in here, so one of them is like the powerhouse, and you can kind of see electrical lines coming out from it. So the university had to produce its own electricity in those days too. And then the other buildings were shops, I think to be used by the early engineering students, the mechanics students. And then there's like this little well in there. And so this is essentially where Mary Yarborough Court is today. So I think it's interesting that little well is in there.
That would have been for the whole campus.
Yes, yeah. I do not know that there was running water in all the buildings. I suspect there wasn't, so. Okay, we're going to go. We're going to spend some time with this map because it's just an interesting one.
It's really cool.
Yeah. So this area in here, kind of like where the back fence is there, you might not be able to see it very well. I don't know if zooming in helps. Now we've zoomed in so far I can't tell where I'm at. There you can sort of see it. There. Along the fence is this stream. That's a stream. And it still exists today, but it's underground. If you were ever out in the court in North Carolina, And you may notice there's kind of storm drains out in the middle of that area. Sometimes you can hear water running in those storm drains, and I think that's the stream, but like I said, it's now underground. And then it goes all the way over here underneath the railroad tracks, and so the railroad tracks have always been a presence on our campus. They were there before the campus even existed.
I wonder, Todd, too, when you were showing the trolley on Hillsborough Street and we see the railroad tracks, how would some of the students or many of the students have taken the train to get here, or do you think most of them would have been?
Yeah, they would have taken this train to get to Raleigh, and then the station would have been in downtown Raleigh, and then they would have taken the trolley out to campus.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And wherever in North Carolina they lived.
Yeah. So I want to show these buildings. Zoom out a little. These 4 buildings were called first, second, third, and fourth dormitory. So that's where students originally lived, as well as Watauga Hall, when they started. And all those buildings are gone today. They are essentially where Brooks Hall is today, especially these 3 buildings. This building may be where the Matsumoto wing is of Brooks Hall. I'm not entirely sure about that. This building, 4th dormitory, actually survived until the 1960s.
Oh, wow.
So it was around for quite some time.
And these were around these 3. Did you say when those were taken down? The first.
Well, Brooks Hall was built, was completed in 1925, so these 2 went down for that. Mm-hmm. And this one survived into the 1940s or 50s, I think. Yeah. So, okay. Virginia and I, we're spending a lot of time on this map, but it's just so interesting. Mm-hmm. We also wanted to point out that sometimes documents in special collections don't tell you everything that you want to know about something. And there are some gaps that we find sometimes, and we call those the Archival Absences. And there's 2 that I want to point out with this map because they're interesting, and we can conjecture about maybe some of the reasons why they're not on this map. The first one, just very quickly, I wanted to kind of go back to Hillsborough Street here up in the corner. So we don't really know from this map what else is on Hillsborough Street. I know from other documents that actually some of the faculty members have their houses along Hillsborough Street on the other side of the street. That is not on this map, but actually we'll see in some of the later maps. And like I said, the State Fairgrounds is kind of over in here somewhere. Then there's buildings, we know today across Pullen Road, which would have gone, down in this area, that Pullen Park's on the other side there, and that's not represented here too. But the other kind of archival absence that I wanted to point out is really farther up this way. If you know the campus, you know the Court of North Carolina kind of goes up a hill. There's a 1911 building. Behind that is Brooks Hall, and then behind that is Patterson Hall. Well, we have found out that there was actually an African American community that lived up there, probably at this time, 1897, which is the date of the map. But that at that time, that would not have been university property. So that may be why it's not shown here. But I've never seen a map that shows that community. And we know later that
community
was, the buildings were torn down and the community was dispersed because the university did acquire that university. And I don't know if the that community was dispersed at the time that the university acquired the property, or if that happened before the university acquired the property. But we know it did happen by the time Patterson Hall was built, which was in 1905. So really, not even 10 years after the date of this map, and that community is gone. And we know, there were other African American communities in the area that still survive to some extent today, like Oberlin community, and like Method community. So
it raises a lot of really interesting questions, and I know public history students here have done some research into kind of later years of Black communities that lived near Hillsborough Street, not the ones that were displaced necessarily at this time, but it's just really interesting to think about what would the relationship have been between those families and the campus, the students that were coming here, which were almost entirely white, other than some international students in the early 20th century.
Right.
So it's just the kind of questions that, as archivists today, we wish that there were accounts or documents, sources that we could look to from the Black community members at that time that would give more of a sense of their experience and their story with that displacement. But it's a great example of the silences or the absences, especially when looking at kind of an institution's history, a predominantly white institution that NC State is.
Exactly. But I think people forget that that African Americans have been associated with this campus from its earliest days. And we're trying. It's hard to tease that out of the documents sometimes, but we try wherever we can.
Yeah. There's a question in the chat, Todd.
Yeah.
Is this map, does it represent a common style for illustrating maps, or do we know what this map was used for?
Well, it's a bird's eye view, which was a common technique in the 19th century. You'll see lots of representations of cities as bird's eye views. So it's not a true map, so to say. It's this is how a bird might see things, but it's for our campus, this is as close as we get to the earliest map of the campus. But it was a common style at that time. Now, a few decades later, after the airplane had been invented, people stopped having bird's eye views created because they'd get aerial photography of things. And so then we do see, maps as being true maps, as these kind of flat representations of a particular area.
Someone else asked, do we know the reference location this map was drawn standing in Newington?
Well, that's a good point, because there would have been no structure that the person drawing this could have been in to have actually seen campus at that time. This is how he imagined a bird would see the campus.
And the bird would be kind of over Pullen, what we know now is like Pullen Park, or almost the Gregg Museum.
Right, or maybe on like this is probably supposed to be Pullen Road here. And there would have been no structures over there, at least no structures tall enough in Pullen Park that you could have seen this, because you'd have, to have actually seen the campus this way, you would have had to have been probably as high up as you could get, like in the bell tower, to see it. But the bell tower would have been over that way, but it's still about 3 decades off from being constructed at this point. Okay, we are going to move on to another map.
And I'll respond. There's a comment that someone wrote, I hope there's more research done on those earlier Black communities. So much to learn in that work, and I couldn't agree more. There is not a lot of research that has been done, but it is a really important area for research to be done now and in the future. That kind of research is what we especially want to support right now. So anyone who wants to kind of dig into that, we can be resources to get you started. There are a lot of other places you might look, state archives and North Carolina collections, things like that.
Yeah,
but
collections that would have Raleigh history. They may or may not. I mean, it's one of those things that sometimes you have to kind of tease out of the documents, or you have to find similar, find documentation of similar types of communities and kind of extrapolate that, things like that might have been happening around here. But we always hope that new documentation gets discovered somewhere.
Yeah, someone could have it. And another question before we dig into this one. Taylor Wolford asked, are there any Sanborn maps of the campus?
The Sanborn maps are really of Raleigh.
Yeah.
And some of the later ones do represent campus, but I think at the very like for the time period that I just showed, 1897, whatever the closest Sanborn map is to that one, Raleigh didn't really extend out this far at that time, so NC State's really not represented on that map. It's really the later maps after the later Sanborn maps, and after like the area across from Hillsborough Street is starting to be developed with houses and stores and things, that we start seeing kind of NC State show up on the edges of the Sanborn maps.
And those are fire insurance maps that show specific structures and detail that are really useful.
Yes, and they're I know if you're an NC State student or faculty, you have access to digitized versions of those maps, and that may be true of I don't remember exactly, but that may be true of the wider public too. But I do know NC State students and faculty have access to that.
Cool.
Okay. Well, we are not going to get to all the maps I have pulled today. Keep coming at us with questions because it's really interesting. There are so many interesting things to talk about with these maps that whatever you in the viewing audience are interested in, we'll be happy to talk to you about. Okay, this next item is obviously not a map, but it is it says it's a code of topographic symbols. So the next group of maps that I am planning to show you were created by students here at NC State, and they're part of a larger collection of maps created by these engineering students. The earliest one's probably about 1905 or 6, but they continue into the 1920s. And they were created as part of an assignment in a civil engineering course where they had to draw maps of campus. And so this document that I'm showing actually probably dates from about 1920. And it's essentially the assignment. It is telling the students, how to draw certain things, like how to draw a building with an outline of the building and then these kind of hash marks, and how to draw things like streams and trees and turf and contours and embankments and how to draw your scale, and how to draw the railway and
electric and sewage and water systems.
All the infrastructure. So we're going to show one or two of these maps created by these students, but I wanted to bring this thing out first to kind of give you a sense of what you'll be seeing on these maps. Really what that's all representing. So
I love that there's sort of a little assignment note that pencil drawing must be approved before you make the tracing,
Yeah.
and then that must be turned in with the tracing, and just the whole kind of rubric for
right.
how to do this and get graded on it.
Exactly. Yeah, and when we see the maps, you'll be like, "Whoa, these are pretty good for
Yeah.
student maps." Okay, so bear with me just a little bit. Oh, that's up here.
Yeah, the
And-
question, what are the earliest examples of student work that we have in the collections? Would these be the earliest, do you think, maps?
The map the first map I showed you may actually
Yeah.
be, because that was, I neglected to tell you all, that was drawn by David Clark, who later went on to become big in the textile publishing world. But he was a student here and in the 1890s, and he got 3 master's degrees. And the degree he got for his civil engineering degree was that bird's eye view that I showed you. That was his work. He didn't have to do a thesis. He did that bird's eye view.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay. So this is maybe that was too far down. This was drawn by the class of '07, not 2007, but 1907, in the Civil Engineering Division. So apparently the class assignment was groups of students. And they were juniors apparently when they drew this, because it was the date way down here is from April of 1906. And so, kind of zoom in a little bit.
Horse lot.
Yeah, the horse lot. So that's, essentially that kind of fenced-in area that I showed you where the dairy is, because that's where that is there. And so, I don't know. Yeah, sorry, this is all an experiment.
Yeah.
Main building is Holiday Hall. This is Primrose, which still has the greenhouse on it. The mechanical building, which is where the power was coming from before. Watauga Hall, kind of off to the end here, the dormitories, but Pullen Hall's been built. That was not in the previous map, and the textile building was not in the previous map. Well, Pullen Hall is no longer here today. There's a parking lot there today.
It burned down.
It burned down, and then it survived into the 1960s and then burned down. The textile building is still here today, but it's not the textile building anymore. It is Tompkins Hall. And so a lot of the units from the College of Humanities and Social Sciences are based in there. And you remember me from the previous map talking about the stream that kind of went through the kind of backside of campus. Well, that's it right here.
Cool.
In blue, because that's what the code said to do in their assignment. And then, Virginia, if you
I'll
carefully move in your direction, that's probably good. Okay, so this building right there on the map is called the Agricultural Building. Well, that is Patterson Hall. And so this vicinity is where that African American community had been. But it is way on the western part of campus
Far away.
in 1906, very far away compared to the other buildings.
And now we're basically right here. This is where
Yeah.
DHL library
Yeah.
was eventually
Yeah.
built later on.
Yeah. And you'll notice that there's like train tracks going there, which is a spur from the railroad.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just pan out. Coming from the railroad and going across the street, because the fairgrounds were across the street, directly across from Patterson Hall. You would look to the entrance of the fairgrounds. I also, just briefly, if we want to shove the map back my way. I don't know if you can see this very well. I don't want to, if I zoom in too much, I might lose track of them. You'll see these buildings on Hillsborough Street there. These are faculty houses. So they were privately owned. The faculty members owned those houses. They weren't part of the university. But you can see where the students drew in the names of the professors that live there.
We know where you live.
We know where you live, yeah. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
So we some of these later maps we do kind of see on the edges of the map some parts of the Raleigh community, but still students are really focused on the campus itself.
And there's a proposed athletic park, it's sort of off the camera right now, but down
a
little ways where they're noting
Let me
possible
zoom out. So
things.
that's there. So it's proposed in 1906, but it actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll see that on some of the later maps. It became known as Riddick Field. And that's where the football stadium was there until the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
Today it's the parking lot next to SAS Hall.
Mm-hmm.
And SAS Hall would be over here. So we'll move on to the next map.
Someone mentioned, I never realized that Clark Dining Hall and Clark Labs are named for different people, father and son, until you mentioned it.
Yeah. Yeah, we could do a whole session on the naming of buildings. But today we're focused on maps.
Yeah. There'll be many follow-up sessions from this.
Yeah.
Go through all the things we want to show.
Just for the sake of brevity, we don't need to necessarily open the whole map. Okay, this is a similar type of map drawn by civil engineering students from 1913. So the last map was 1906, this one's 1913. And we do see additional development on campus. So again, Holiday Hall, Primrose, the textile building, but now we have Winston Hall along Hillsborough Street there. Patterson Hall way out here, but now we have the 1911 building here, and it was originally a dormitory. Then we have these shops, and that's what we know today as park shops. And now the powerhouse has moved way out here, because it used to be here, and now it's out here.
Yeah.
And now we have a dining hall, which is Leisure Hall today. Here we see the athletic field, so that was that SAS parking lot. Here we see a YMCA building, was built in 1912, I think. It's no longer here today, but that's where Camp Hefner Hall is today. Then over here we see a building called South Dorm. Well, that's here today, but what happened was a few years after this, more of it was built going in this direction, and it's now Syme Hall.
Oh, yeah.
Now this map is also interesting. Well, actually, no, let me back up a second. You may notice that way that South Dorm is drawn is different from the way that these other buildings are drawn. Well, that's because I think it was drawn at a later time. The map is dated 1913, but these South Dorm, 5th and 6th Dorm were built after 1913.
Okay, yeah.
So I think somebody amended this
Yeah.
map at some later point. Now,
It's
it
like
wasn't
some
too much
erasure
longer.
around here.
Yeah. So South Dorm or Sym Hall, this part of it was built in 1916. And these two buildings are Gold and Welch Hall today, and they were built in 1921. But here we still have 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Dorm
And this is
still there.
hospital.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's, it was also called the infirmary, and that's Winslow Hall. But Winslow Hall was greatly changed in the 1950s, so it doesn't look like it did, or have the same footprint that it did in 1913.
And it would be put to good use a few years later when the Spanish flu.
Yes,
pandemic
yes, the
came to campus.
1918 Influenza Pandemic, where at one point in time about a third of the student body was sick, and they didn't all fit
Yeah.
in this infirmary or hospital, and so the overflow was the YMCA building. And 13 students passed away because of that, and the women from the Raleigh community came to campus to nurse the students, and some of them passed away too.
There's a whole stream we could do on that history.
Yeah. Well, I think I forgot to tell you to put a link up.
Oh, yeah, I can put a link up.
I think that was the link for
The blog post.
yeah,
Yeah, there it is.
that one, yeah.
I'll put this in the chat. There's a blog post Tom wrote about this. Yeah, and that map did have a street trolley. You showed a trolley
Yeah.
on Hillsborough Street. Some of the questions in the chat.
Okay, now I think we're gonna maybe skip over some. Let's see. Well, no, we'll go with the next one.
Yeah.
Let's make sure I can find it. All right, bear with me. Here we go.
This one is really cool.
Yeah. I think this one we will also not unroll all the way. Okay, so this map is also 1913, also drawn by civil engineering students as a part of their assignment. But this gets us way west of where we were before. You may remember in the previous map, or one of the previous maps, I talked about the railroad spur that went to the state fairgrounds across the street. Well, that's what this is.
Oh, yeah,
So
okay.
we're talking west of there. So this, it's hard to know exactly what today is there, but I think essentially that went through the Brickyard, possibly between where D.H. Hill Library is and Scott Hall is, and then crossed over Hillsborough Street at that point. So if that is true, then that puts this vineyard drawn here kind of on the west side of the Brickyard. This stream kind of coming down into that kind of tree section that's just west of the Brickyard, and then continuing down, like probably through what would be Williams Hall today, or maybe kind of squeezing in between Williams Hall and what is that, Dabney Hall, and then going around the backside of Dabney, going under the railroad tracks, probably about where the Free Expression Tunnel is today.
It's a pretty big piece of land.
Yeah, and you can see here it was kind of marshy or swampy like there.
Yeah.
I think that's what those symbols mean.
Yeah.
But then, you have this vineyard here. Excuse me. You have more vineyards here. This is probably like Gardner Hall. This may be Thomas Hall. This pear orchard and peach orchard. The peach orchard's probably about where a Marianne Fox building is, and the greenhouses that are like on the back side of that.
Yeah. Dan Allen, on the way to Dan Allen.
Yeah, Dan Allen would be over here.
Yeah.
Clark Hall, Nelson Hall probably would have been, or would later be up here. I don't know if I can do this without creating shadows. And so you may see this here. I don't know, zooming in will help us see any. Yeah, you probably can't read this, but it says Professor Pillsbury here. So apparently this was Professor Pillsbury's house. He was a professor of horticulture, and he was also a horticulturist with the Agricultural Experiment Station. And the experiment station at this point in time was actually located just across Hillsborough Street. So it would make sense that he would live nearby. And this would have been university property, so apparently the university provided Professor Hillsbury with a house.
Very special.
Yeah, because the other faculty members didn't get a house. And then we have an apple orchard here. So you may remember from the bird's eye view, where I talked about the students having to grow their own food. I think by this point in time, the 1910s, there's probably not as much of that going on anymore. The student body is several hundred. In 1918, it's 1,000. So that's a lot of people to have to grow food for, or raise food for. So I think what's going on in here is probably research. Like these orchards are set up for research, maybe for teaching horticultural techniques, but probably more so for research, especially if the experiment station is across the street, because that was the whole point of the experiment station, to conduct research, to figure out agricultural techniques, or figure out particular varieties of crops or livestock that would be best suited to agriculture here in North Carolina. So I think that's what that's about.
It's really cool. I never knew that there was a vineyard on campus.
Yes.
Until this map today.
Yeah, and like we have some aerial photography from just after World War II, so the late 1940s, and you can see the remnants of the vineyards still in some of those photos. So these went on for a few decades. Okay. We need to move right along here.
And we will be having other streams in the future with maps from other time periods, but some we may not get to today we could feature in another stream too.
Yeah.
There are a lot of cool maps to look at in the archives here.
And if you get me talking, I just talk forever. So you people in the audience, if you're tired of me talking, just tell me to shut up. Okay, what's next? Because I think we're going to skip over some stuff. Oh, yeah. Okay, here we go. Okay.
Put a link to this one.
Yes, this one's digitized, so you can look at this on your own. This is it's called you can read that. It's
Just go back
yeah.
to the. There it is. Yeah.
yeah. A general plan of development of North Carolina State College. So we're State College by this point in time. This is 1923. This is essentially the first master plan of campus. An architect and landscape designer from up north, New York and maybe Boston, I can't remember where the landscape person was from, designed this in 1923. And we're just going to focus in on a few things here. So you can see the football field there, and then like all these buildings through here, like that's Holiday, that's Tompkins Hall, that's Winston Hall.
1911 buildings.
Yeah, 1911. So to give you some frame of reference, but I kind of wanted to look over in the east of campus. Let's zoom in here a little bit farther. So that number 9 is Holiday Hall. Pullen Road is through here. So this is today Pullen Park, but this area right here is where the chancellor's residence was built, and it later became the Gregg Museum when the chancellor moved out to Lake Raleigh. A few years after this map was made, the chancellor's residence was put there, and then behind it, right there, they were reserving that space for faculty homes, which I thought was interesting because, as a general rule, the university did not provide faculty with homes, except for Professor Pillsbury.
Yeah, right.
And then, south of that, which is definitely in what is Pullen Park, was, to be used for dormitories, but as a last resort.
As a last resort.
Yeah, right, as a last resort. That's interesting that the designers were saying, let's keep some open space on this campus. Let's not just fill it with buildings. As the campus and Raleigh is developing, let's reserve some of this space to keep as open space forever. So I think that's interesting.
Potentially the landscape design, landscape architects influence.
Yeah, exactly. Some of the other interesting things I wanted to show here. Okay, we have really zoomed in here. I can't tell where I'm going. Okay, so there's the State Fairgrounds across Hillsborough Street. There's the old poultry experiment station. This building right there is probably Professor Pillsbury's place.
Yep.
And then, you get off of university property, and this Liberty Heights, which is a residential development that, those apartment towers, what are they called? That's next to Dan Allen parking structure. I can't remember either, but that's about where that is. So Dan Allen structures in that vicinity, and Dan Allen, the road is kind of in through here. I'm going to zoom out. And I wanted to zoom in farther west, the far western parts of campus. So there's two little things here that I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
So there's the college experiment station has now moved way out here, and this road is not western, but it's probably close to where western is. And then right next to it a site for an aviation field,
Wow.
which was really interesting.
Yeah.
That they were thinking of putting that as part of the university.
That's surprising.
Yeah,
Huh.
yeah.
I guess they thought that might be an area for engineering,
Yeah.
teaching, and research.
Yeah, well, and yeah, with the I think out of mechanical engineering. So
Mhm.
Catherine Stinson, was
Yeah.
about 10 years after this, the first woman to get a degree from the College of Engineering,
Yeah.
and she went into working in aviation.
Yeah.
And was her degree? Do you
It
remember?
was aeronautical engineering.
Yeah.
Yeah, she met before she became a student here. She met Amelia Earhart.
Right.
When Earhart sort of touched down in Raleigh, and Catherine Stinson told Amelia Earhart, "I want to be a pilot like you." And Amelia Earhart told her, "Don't be a pilot. You should be an engineer, because then you can really influence what happens and what pilots do."
Right.
So she studied aeronautical engineering as the first
So-
female student here.
So yeah, she was here in the 1930s. So in the 1920s, apparently, we're already starting to look at developing a program in aeronautics.
Very cool.
Yeah. Okay, that's going to be it for this map. And we are going to go on to,
The good-natured map.
yeah,
that
I
the
think
next one?
I think you're right. The good-natured map.
Yeah.
You'll see why we're calling it the good-natured map. Not that the map itself has a pleasant disposition. It's actually called the Good-Natured Map of North Carolina State College. So, give you a sense of the scale of it here. Okay, so what do we want to talk about this one? So this map dates from the 1940s, or from about 1940, excuse me. And we don't know who drew it.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like it could have been drawn by a student, but we don't know that for sure. We don't know who. We don't know why it was drawn.
Mm-hmm.
We don't... well, and this isn't even the original of it,
Yeah.
because this is like a blueprint reproduction of it. Blueprints are basically a type of reproduction. And so we don't know what happened to the original, but it's a really interesting map.
Yeah.
Kind of zoom in on things.
The orientation is kind of flipped from what we usually see of.
Yeah, usually, in a typical map in North America, you will see the top of the map is the north and the bottom of the map is the south. West is on the left, east is on the right. So this is actually looking from the north,
Mm-hmm.
or kind of looking towards the south, or really the southwest, really. So zoom back out. Give you a point of reference. That's the bell tower. And over here is the football field.
So Hillsborough Street along
And then
here.
Hillsborough Street is along there. Right, Pullen Road is through here. So Holiday, the infirmary, Watauga, the library, which we today call Brooks Hall. It was the library at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
The dormitories running over here. And then, you see all these like little students wandering around campus saying or doing amusing little things, although some of it might not be amusing
Not
today.
as amusing to us today.
Yeah, but some of it's amusing.
Yeah.
Like, which one of you, I don't know if you can see it, which one of you is Shorty?
Someone's getting carried into the infirmary.
Somebody being on a stretcher carried into the infirmary.
Mhm.
This guy, this guy may be helping us to date it to 1940.
Oh, yeah.
He's singing a song in which one of the lyrics is "Oh Johnny, and that's I think from a Andrews Sister song that was popular around 1940.
Okay.
And Andrews Sisters was a trio of women who sang at that time, kind of in that big band jazz style. You know,
There's the dining hall.
The dining hall, which is Leisure Hall.
The line out the door.
The line out the door. I don't know what these guys are doing here.
Yeah.
So we'll kind of ignore them. These guys appear to be playing baseball in the middle of the court in North Carolina. These guys are talking about going over to the freshman quadrangle, which I think was way over here. What is now the honors quad. Becton, Bagwell, Berry, and Clark. This is Thompson Theater, which is a gymnasium at this time. So all this is across the railroad tracks.
And that was at the time ROTC or military training was mandatory for all students.
Exactly.
Until the 60s.
Yes, that's right. They're playing tennis here. Somewhere over in here is where Reynolds Hall would be.
There are the bees attacking.
There's the bees coming out of the insectary, which at this point in time is attached to a building called the Zoology Building. The power plant, which is the State College smokestack there, apparently it had a whistle that went toot-toot. And farther down the railroad track, I've gone too far, sorry. So these buildings are what are now called Alexander and Turlington dormitories, but apparently the students at that time called them Apex and Carey or the Country Club because they were so far out.
Yeah.
That was the farthest reaches of campus at that time. And got this guy who's about to saw himself off a tree there. And then we got this guy chomping on some apples.
Yeah,
so this is the orchard. This is
Pillsbury's
yeah.
It's so fascinating to think we have no idea who made this. It seems like potentially a student. Just the audience at the time, students were predominantly white men, almost exclusively, and that seems to be the humor of the who they were writing this for.
Some of the humor that we're not focusing on here is quite blatantly sexist.
Yeah. Which is a lot of what you'll see in the technician newspapers and
at this time.
The academics. So there's a lot of material to show you, who was here.
Yeah.
But it's a really incredible map. The detail and how it gives a little lens into the actual personality and who was here. After everything we've seen from the other maps, how campus was evolving and what was happening here. It's amazing.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting what you can tease out of just one or a few documents.
Yeah.
If you really take the time to look at it, and if you know some context, sometimes if you don't know the context, it's kind of meaningless, or you don't catch things. But if you know some of the context, because you and I have worked with so many other documents in our collection, we know kind of the back history sometimes of things, and can fill in gaps that may appear in particular documents.
Well, this has been really fun, Todd, to go through these. I know there's a
Yeah.
lot more that we could have done, and anyone watching who is interested in looking at things like this or looking at any of these things in more detail, these are all part of our collections that anyone can come
Right.
and view in person and DHL Library. Plus our digital collections and blog is out there on our website. But please feel free to contact us. Our website I'll put up in the chat again. And we'll be doing more map streams in the coming months
Mhm.
for some of the post-war years. It's just a really interesting way to look at campus history and raises a lot of great questions.
Yeah. I think this worked out well. I think I picked too many maps, so.
It's a wealth of riches. So.
Yeah, it is a wealth of riches, but now I have a better sense of how many we might be able to talk about within the span of an hour. I only cut out 3, so maybe I'll bring some of those to the next session.
Yeah, I don't think there's any reason to hold back.
Yeah.
And I'm going to share another blog post that you authored about New Deal construction.
Right. Yeah. So a little bit before, when the Good-Natured map was made, there were, through some of the New Deal alphabet soup programs like the WPA and the PWA and even the CCC, CWA, all those kind of relief programs to kind of employ people during the 1930s, during the Great Depression. And they built buildings and highways and things all over the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Well, some of that did happen here at NC State, like the little field house in Riddick Field, and Withers Hall, and Nelson Hall, which isn't shown on the map, as well as, it's not shown on this map, but what today we know as the Free Expression Tunnel.
Right, yeah.
When it was constructed in 1939, it was just a tunnel. What didn't really have a name, but that was the original part of that was built under the WPA in the 1930s. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. And it was in the 1960s that it became called the Free Expression Tunnel, and then you were allowed to spray paint in there. Yeah. Yeah. So.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, yeah, thanks, Todd, for being our intrepid leader and choosing these great maps today. And we'll be back, folks, for more. So
Yes.
stay tuned.
Yes.
All right. Well, we're going to sign off.